at a friend of mine's party. Matter of fact, we visit with his brother's a good friend of the show, Blake Eddins at the Arkansas Sports Radio. His little brother, Bart, played at Auburn, and Bart and I were good friends. He married an Auburn volleyball player. Now they're actually expecting a son that's due on the same day as my daughter's due.
Okay, so a volleyball player and a football player got married. What do you have?
Hopefully you got a tackle or something. But at their wedding, Philip Lutzenkirchen was there. And, of course, the egg ended up being on my face because I sit down at the church next to him, not knowing, I had no clue who he was. I just sit down and actually arrived just right on time. And I look over, and I'm with a friend of mine who I played ball with at Alabama. And I look over, and I see him. I'm like, man, I'm sitting right next to Philip Lutzenkirchen. Just saying it like –
to yourself?
Yeah, I can't believe of all people – one of my least favorite players.
Yeah. And
so we ended up kind of jarring back and forth. And one of those guys just, didn't really have an attitude, didn't have anything that I pegged him to be like, to be honest with you. And that was one of the things at church this Sunday was talking about, quit being so judgmental of people. You're not the person to judge. Yeah. The judgment is not for us. We're supposed to be down here and carry out what he asks us to do. Let him do his job. He's the ultimate judge. And as I was thinking about that Philip is one of those guys that I missed on, that I judged, that I thought was a certain way, all because of a damn football game.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was an expectation of myself that I disappointed myself.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I disappointed myself. I let something that really in the grand scheme of things does not matter affect in the way I thought of somebody that ended up being a really cool person that I had a lot of fun with.
Yeah. The basic definition, Baron, of prejudices of being prejudiced means you prejudge. And prejudging goes from something that we all do to racist or bigot when you meet that person and you still refuse to let the evidence you now have change your opinion. And that's what happens a lot of times with this Alabama-Auburn rivalry. There's a lot of prejudices out there, and it doesn't really matter what happens. You still move past. And so in this rivalry, if I could put in quotation marks, there's a lot of bigotry and racism and whatever you want to call it. In other words, that happens out of this rivalry. But the reality of it is a lot of the players, some of us grew up as friends. I had a best friend. My high school teammate's dad was my high school coach. Two of his sons played at Auburn while I was here. So we had that rivalry, and we were actually friends, and there's a picture of he and I like embracing after the game, and that made all over the place when we lost to Auburn. But my point behind that is, Baron, you were talking about judgment and different things like that. And I always tell people, as a believer, I know that I deal with grief and loss in a way that I know I'm going to see that person again. And I don't know how other people deal with it, but I will. Can I read just a couple things just to provide some comfort? Because there's going to be other people who
look,
may not be.
Even if you didn't know Philip Lutzenkirchen or you don't even care, I know everyone's lost somebody at some point.
Exactly. And Lamentations 3 says, "For no one is cast off by the Lord forever. Though he brings grief, he will show compassion. So great is his unfailing love, for he does not willingly bring affliction or grief to anyone." And then Matthew 11:28 says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." And to me, those two scriptures together kind of, because when it happens, the first thing is, why? Wow. Because my first thought was, man, I'm 44. That could have been me. I mean, he was in the backseat of a car, was not driving. I don't know what he was doing at that point, but either way, he wasn't driving. And I've had people say, well, he shouldn't have been out doing this, and that. But here's my point. I go, and I'm kind of the realist. I go, how many times have I done something stupid?
Oh man,
that could have ended worse than what publicly came out.
I'm just going to step out on a limb, Martin. I'm just going to step out there. I would say that I've done 10 times more dumb stuff than you have.
But guess what? How many dumb things does it take for someone to lose their life? One. You see what I'm saying? So sometimes we have the tendency to look and go, well, a young guy, he was out, it was late in the night, blah, blah, blah. And none of that matters at this moment. The family needs to know that there's nothing that can change about what he did or didn't do. But what we can do is, for those of us who believe or who want to, let's be of comfort to anyone who has lost a loved one. We just happen to be talking about Philip because that's the way our nation works. The other young man, Aaron, what was his name again?
Aaron Douglas.
Aaron Douglas, from Georgia, who lost his life.
Excuse me, Ian Davis. I'm sorry.
Ian Davis.
Aaron Douglas lost his life here for the Alabama program several years ago.
But and we just have to remember and pray for those families and that comfort. Here's the strange thing. I read that and says he's going to comfort. Well, you know how he comforts? He comforts through you and I. It's the fact that if Barron, I'm in relationship with Barron and Barron struggles, then I pick up the phone and call Barron. I take something to Barron's house to say, hey, man, I'm just thinking about you, if I can help you. So the comfort doesn't come through this mystical thing. The comfort comes through you and I being there for one another. And at this moment, the rivalry does not matter at all. I know that's how you and I, make our living a lot of times doing that. But the reality is, in these types of moments, it just doesn't matter.
And I'm bad about it. Look, man, I stereotype and I'm prejudiced against Auburn people, Auburn fans. I am openly admit it. But yesterday, all I could think about when I got that news, and I was mid-breakfast, could not eat, could barely swallow what I had in my mouth because I was eating while I got the message. And, all I could think about was my group of guys, how close we are, how utterly devastating. And devastating isn't even a good word. It doesn't really put the feelings that I would have. If it were the roles were reversed and it was someone in my group or someone in my family, I think this is one of the figures. And because of the play that he made in 2010, and he was recruited by both teams, he's an Alabama kid, born and bred. Derek Thomas would be another guy that I would say had that effect in the passing between where both fan bases looked at it and said, okay, this is a little bit bigger than this rivalry. And let me tell you, it's a big rivalry.
Yeah, and when Derek lost his life, it was tragic. And unfortunately, Derek had some ups and downs, where the emotions got to, he was in a wreck, and then he was paralyzed, and we grieved over his loss of being able to play football. Then he started to get better, Barron, and then boom, just like that, you got that news, and once again, both in the collegiate level, Alabama, Auburn, and in the pros, it just reverberated. And I think part of that is, like it, love it, hate it, whatever, we idolize sports figures in this country. And when they're young and at the peak, they're almost like Hercules, where we think they're indestructible. And it's just such a shock when we lose one. And Derek Thomas definitely was one of those polarizing in a positive way figures when he passed away for this rivalry.
I was too young to remember it. He passed away in what, 93, 4?
Somewhere, right? I was just out of college when it happened.
Yeah,
so I wasn't very old.
I wasn't
very old. I'm not very old now.
Yeah, I was 6 or 7.
Thanks, Barry.
I do remember Derek Thomas. I do remember him, but I don't remember like his passing.
Yeah, it was tragic.
And for someone to give that impact, and I just go back to that saying that, and I use it a lot in my own thoughts. You die twice. Once when you take your last breath, and the last time when someone says your name for the last time on earth. You're talking about two people that, in a rivalry that is this big. Think about how powerful of a person that is. People talk about stages and platforms and to whom much is given, much is expected. Think about how much life that is that you impact. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I mean, there are people that go through and go through life. There's hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people that don't impact anyone.
Right.
they come in and they leave as a a leaf in the wind. I mean, there's just no impact. And then you have guys like these type figures that become larger than the largest rivalry that I know of.
Yeah. And the key there, Baron, is, and we're not saying that someone has to be a celebrity to have impact. That's not what we're communicating here. So if you're only impacting your family, you do that and you live a life that lives beyond you. But when you talk about this Alabama-Auburn rivalry, there's think about how many guys have played in this rivalry and how many names would have this type of impact. And that's a short list in comparison to it. And that's why I want to encourage, man, every player out there that played in this rivalry, Baron, that's in this rivalry. And if there's any young kids right now listening that someday is going to play in this rivalry, you have a great opportunity. You have a great opportunity to live a life in such a way that even when your life here is done, your name continues to be mentioned in a positive light and what it means to those who you've left behind. And I just, like I said, legacy is, to me, is what it's about, Baron, because, when you really think about in the scheme of things, 25 years, 80 years, is that really a long time? Not compared to what
eternity, no.
Not compared to eternity, and not compared to what you leave behind, Baron. Your kids, your grandkids. I mean, I didn't have a close relationship with my grandfather, and so sometimes even I'm envious when I hear you talk about those relationships, because I didn't have that.
Right.
And so I want to make sure that if I get that opportunity, when that opportunity presents itself, that I'm building upon that, so that when I'm long gone, the life that I live is still impacting those who are behind.
You listened to Houston Huber this morning as we're talking about the life of Philip Lutzenkirchen. The quote that I keep reading this morning was actually given to me by a teammate of mine, Charles Hoke, who's now in New York City. I went to visit him about a year and a half ago, kind of going through a tough time. In the scheme of things, for other people's troubles, not that big a deal, but it was a big deal to me at the time.
Right.
And that's the thing about stress and depression. It doesn't really matter what everybody else thinks. If it's a big deal to you, it's a big deal.
It's personal.
And, he gave me that quote. And the first person I thought of, and I know this is kind of a side topic, was Mal Moore. You talk about someone in this rivalry who's never going to die. Mal Moore, his impact will live forever. Mal Moore on Earth will live forever.
Yeah.
I mean, he has a building named after him. Obviously, that makes it easy. But, Philip, I think is going to be one of those guys that's going to live for a long time, only because of, like you mentioned, what he was able to do
in the biggest moment. In
the biggest moment of outside of this year, it might be the only thing that's trumped it.
I think it still trumps it in longevity. That'll be a special play. But what that led to, had they went on to win a national championship, the Chris Davis play would be greater. But that play enabled them to go on to win that national championship. And therefore, he'll always have that special place in the Auburn family. And, of course, on our side, it may not be on the mantle.
Infamous,
yeah,
maybe.
It won't be on the mantle, but it would always be remembered as an asterisk of the one that got away.